This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses.
We do talk about gear a little bit on this channel, right? And one of the things that I've seen kind of creep up in price, creep up in interest, and it's sort of in fashion, I guess maybe it has been in fashion for a while, is this idea of vintage guitars and, you know, buying instruments that are from sort of the golden era of Fender, pre-CBS or whatever, or the first kind of few hundred bursts from Gibson. Now, I've seen a story this week that on a forum I've been following the thread that really put the frighteners in me and made me think, like, I can't really see myself ever being in a situation where I'd be comfortable enough dropping the kind of wedge that you have to secure a vintage guitar. Now, in particular in the UK, there are a few kind of rogue dealers, a few kind of people that names come up in this kind of realm quite a lot. If you do a little bit of Googling, check around on the fretboard forum, is a name, you know, there's a guy from the office called Gareth, and that's the first name of one of these people. You can leave it in the comments if you want. I'm not going to say it on the video in case he kind of targets me and the family. But it seems like there's enough value potentially in counterfeiting these guitars that people have made it sort of part of their goal in life to actually pass off some pretty convincing counterfeits, particularly to people who might like be casual like me. And you know, what this has made me think is that there's never a good argument for making an impulse buy on a vintage instrument, which is probably obvious anyway, innit? But I think it'd be super important if you are spending this kind of wedge on a guitar to definitely make sure that you've done your due diligence, asked at least one or two experts. Yeah, you got to be careful, I think. David Beebe said just buy a new one and punch it in the for a few years, which I think was good advice. Because maybe in America this doesn't happen quite as much, but in the UK, of course, we don't have that many original burst Les Pauls, as far as I'm aware, or kind of pre-CBS Stratocasters. There might be a few, and probably Scott McKeown owns a few of them. There are like obviously collectors of this stuff and players of this stuff. I think Chris Buck has one as well, right? But to me, it seems now, especially when they kind of jumped up in price again, even in like the last 5 years, where it's now sort of £10,000 pretty easily to get like a player grade Strat from the pre-CBS period, if not more. And certainly the Gibson bursts are insane amounts of money. But this story put the frighteners in me because this chap had got a 54 Junior and an Ibanez Gem, and he traded it for what he thought was a 63 Strat that had been refinished and stuff. And then when he looked into it a bit more, this particular Strat had been the talk of some kind of Strat player forums, and people knew about this instrument from online. You know, it's been reported on Reverb as a fake, all this sort of stuff. And as an unwitting kind of guy who's just happened to make this trade and then ended up with a fraudulent counterfeit, to me it just sounds like must be the worst feeling, or one of the worst feelings that you can get when buying gear. You know, losing out to that kind of value seems to me to be pretty insane. And also the kind of money that's involved in this, I assume the counterfeits are only going to get better, right? If you can fool a few experts online with this sort of stuff, which is the story that I just followed the rabbit hole a bit. There was a chap that had bought a Les Paul that was passed off as like a burst, and there were even some experts on the Les Paul forum that thought that it was real, and they kind of looked at it, and over the period of time that the thread kind of shook out, they decided that there were aspects of the guitar that were probably original, or at least early, that had been put on the guitar, and that it was a pretty reasonable fake, and there was like little elements that they were able to really pinpoint, like 2 or 3, and so presumably, I guess these people that are making these fake guitars or counterfeiting these guitars, or you know, trying to pass off guitars as fake vintage guitars, they have definitely a huge interest in making these as good as possible. So presumably there's going to become a stage where even someone like Joe Bonamassa is going to get potentially caught out by something like this, right? It seems like the money is there that is going to become more of an issue. And that for me also, it makes a bit more sense why you'd want it, instead of spending however much money you'd spend on a vintage guitar and be worried about maybe its provenance, maybe one day finding out that you've got a horror story on your hands. Just go and buy a Murphy Lab Les Paul or something. They're cheap, aren't they? $7,500 or whatever they cost. And yes, it's not actually built 70 years ago or whatever, but you actually know that it is what it is, unless they're going to start faking those as well. It's a minefield, isn't it? Just buy an Epiphone or something. Put the frighteners in me for sure. And not that it was ever a thing that I thought would be on my radar anyway. I played a vintage 64 Strat, I think, from Fill Up the Road. That was what was in the introduction there, and it's a really beautiful guitar and really cool to have a piece of history, I assume. But if even the player's grade stuff is, you know, multiples of thousands more than the equivalent custom shop, and if also in the back of your mind you have like this feeling like, is this actually legitimate? When it comes to sell it again, you're going to have all the same kind of feelings coming back to you from the third party, you know, who's saying like, what's the source for this? Can you prove X and Y? They're going to be like really putting it under a microscope. To me, that just seems like something that I don't really feel safe being a part of, right? And luckily I don't have that kind of wedge to just drop on a Strat or whatever. So yeah, play authentic.